I only feared him. That is what Nikita Koloff said about the men who truly terrified him in the ring. The Russian Nightmare was one of the most imposing characters in professional wrestling history. He was massive, committed, and believable. He legally changed his name to Nikita Koloff. He refused to break character in public for over a year. He sold the evil Russian gimmick so completely that fans thought he was actually from the Soviet Union. But beneath that monster persona was a man who knew real fear. There were 5 wrestlers who made him genuinely afraid every time he stepped through those ropes. If you want more stories like this, use the hype feature and give this video hype, because this one gets wild fast. Nikita Koloff was born Nelson Scott Simpson in Minnesota. He was not a wrestler. He was not trained in the art. Actually, he was a football player with almost no wrestling background. In March 1984, Road Warrior Animal recruited him into Jim Crockett Promotions. By June, he was already wrestling on television. His debut match on June 5th, 1984, lasted exactly 13 seconds. That was not a coincidence. That was not because he was so dominant. The bookers kept his matches short to hide the fact that he barely knew what he was doing. He was 6'2" and weighed 285 pounds. He looked like a Soviet war machine. He looked like a monster. But looking like a monster and being safe in the ring are two very different things. Koloff had approximately 1 to 2 months of training before his debut. That is nothing in the wrestling world. Most wrestlers spent years learning their craft in small territories across the country. They learned how to fall properly. They learned how to protect themselves. They learned how to work with veterans who might test them with stiff strikes. Koloff had none of that foundation. He was learning on the job in front of thousands of people. The 1980s wrestling world was brutal in ways modern fans cannot fully understand. It was not like the polished, safe product you see today. The line between performance and real violence was razor thin. This was an era of high-stakes athletic theater mixed with Cold War geopolitical propaganda and a legitimate culture of physical intimidation. The professional wrestling industry of the 1980s functioned as a unique intersection where the scripted and the real collided every single night. Veterans tested new guys constantly. Shooters worked stiff as a matter of pride. And some men were genuinely reckless with the bodies of their opponents. Others were half blind and could not control their strikes even if they wanted to. The locker room was full of danger from every direction. Koloff walked into that world with almost zero defensive training. He had the size and the strength of an elite athlete, but he did not know how to protect himself when a veteran decided to stiffen him up. That made him a target. Some wrestlers saw him as fresh meat. Others just worked so hard and so stiff that everyone got hurt regardless of experience level. Koloff rose to the top fast. Too fast by the standards of the veterans who had paid their dues for years. He became a major star in the National Wrestling Alliance within months of his debut. He wrestled 454 matches in 1986 alone. When that is more than 1 match a day for an entire year. Think about that schedule. Think about the wear and tear on the body. Think about the cumulative damage from taking bumps night after night in different towns across the country. His finishing move was the Russian sickle. It was a high-speed clothesline that mimicked Stan Hansen's Western lariat. It was a lariat variant designed to emphasize his explosive power and Soviet toughness. It looked devastating on television. It was devastating in reality. But every night, Koloff had to get in the ring with men who could end his career in one bad moment. And 5 of those men scared him more than anyone else. This was not just about being nervous before a big match. This was not butterflies in the stomach. This was genuine apprehension about physical safety. This was fear of permanent injury. This was fear of paralysis. This was fear of death. This fear was not imaginary. It was not part of the storyline. It was not something the bookers created to add drama. It was real. Koloff has spoken openly about it in shoot interviews over the years. He has talked about it on his Man Up podcast where he discusses his life and career. He named names. He explained in detail why each man made him feel unsafe. Some of them were accidents waiting to happen because of physical limitations. Others were deliberately cruel because they resented his fast rise. One of them ended his career for good at Halloween Havoc in 1992. Understanding why these 5 men created such fear requires understanding what wrestling was like in that era. It requires understanding what kayfabe meant and how it was enforced. Kayfabe was everything in the 1980s. Kayfabe is the illusion that wrestling is real. It is the commitment to the character and the storyline even outside the ring. In the 1980s, wrestlers protected kayfabe with actual violence. If you were too green and made the business look fake, veterans would stiffen you up to teach you a lesson about respect. If you were too popular without earning it through years of hard work, they would hurt you to remind you of your place in the hierarchy. If you were unlucky enough to be booked against someone who could not see properly or who had no off switch mentally, you just had to survive and hope you made it out without a broken neck. Koloff experienced all of it. He was thrust into a locker room populated by seasoned veterans who had been wrestling for decades. He was surrounded by legitimate shooters who could hurt people for real if they chose to. Throughout his career, and particularly in his later reflections via shoot interviews, Koloff identified a select group of 5 wrestlers who elicited genuine apprehension every time he had to work with them. These individuals represented different facets of professional danger. There was visual impairment that made strikes unpredictable. There was supernatural strength combined with reckless abandon. There was veteran malice used to enforce hierarchy. There was career-ending recklessness from massive men. There was unpredictable chaos from hardcore brawlers. Each category of fear had a name attached to it, and each name represented a different way Koloff could have his career ended or his body permanently broken. The first man Koloff feared was Stan Hansen. Hansen was a legend in both Japan and the NWA. He was famous for his lariat. It was one of the most brutal finishing moves in all of wrestling. The Western lariat was a devastating clothesline that crowds went absolutely mental for. When Hansen hit it, the crowd erupted. But there was a serious problem that made working with Hansen terrifying. Stan Hansen was legally blind without his glasses. In the ring, he could not wear them because they would break. That meant he could not see his opponents clearly during matches. He relied on silhouettes and shapes. He relied on muscle memory from years of experience. He would aim for the general area of a person's head and chest. Then he would swing with maximum force to make absolutely sure he did not miss the target. Koloff described it like wrestling a man who saw the world as blurry shapes moving around him. Hansen once said in an interview that he saw men that looked like trees walking. That is a biblical reference, but also a terrifying reality. When you consider that those trees are human beings whose skulls can break, the danger becomes clear. When you cannot see your opponent clearly, you cannot gauge distance properly. You cannot pull your punches at the last second. You cannot adjust your force mid-strike based on positioning. You just swing as hard as you can and hope you connect with something. Hansen had no choice but to work this way. His blindness was not something he could control, but for his opponents, it created a nightmare scenario every single match. Koloff praised Hansen as a good person outside the ring. He respected him as a professional. He acknowledged Hansen's legendary status in the industry, but he hated wrestling him. At every match with Hansen was a gamble with serious stakes. Hansen did not pull his punches. He could not. He did not have the visual clarity to gauge distance properly and adjust. Every lariat came in at full speed. Every forearm smash was delivered with maximum impact. Every strike was stiff by necessity rather than choice. Koloff said Hansen was dangerous and blind as a bat. That combination meant every single night was a legitimate risk of serious injury. The fear was not about Hansen being a bad person or trying to hurt people. The fear was about Hansen being unable to control the force of his strikes because he simply could not see well enough to do anything else. Hansen occupied a unique category of dread in Koloff's mind. The apprehension was not born of professional jealousy. It was not born of personal dislike. And it was rooted in a fundamental physical reality that created chaos every time they shared a ring for a program. Hansen's visual impairment forced him to rely on a completely different set of skills than most wrestlers used. He had to use muscle memory developed over thousands of matches. He had to trust his instincts about where opponents would be. He had to swing for the fences every single time because missing would expose his weakness to the crowd and break the illusion. For Koloff, wrestling Hansen for a 6-month program meant facing a man who could not see him properly night after night. Every strike delivered by Hansen was stiff by necessity rather than malice. He did not have the visual acuity to pull a punch or a lariat at the last second. This was not a choice Hansen made, and this was a survival mechanism he developed to compensate for his disability. But for his opponents, it was a waking nightmare. In a profession where safety depends on the precise coordination of physical impact between two performers, a blind opponent is a chaotic variable that cannot be controlled or accurately predicted. The most infamous example of Hansen's reckless blindness happened during a match in Charleston, South Carolina. The match involved a bull rope tied between both wrestlers. It also involved a heavy cowbell attached to the rope. These were common props in territory wrestling during that era. The bull rope would be attached to both wrestlers to keep them close. The cowbell was supposed to be used for drama and near misses. Hansen was supposed to threaten Koloff with it to get a reaction from the crowd. The crowd was supposed to react to the danger and fear that Koloff might get hit. But Hansen swung the bell with such wild abandon that Koloff had to leap completely completely out of the ring to avoid being killed. Koloff saw the bell coming at his head at full speed. He knew if it connected properly, his skull would fracture. He knew he could suffer permanent brain damage. He knew he could die. So he jumped through the ropes and out of the ring as fast as he could move. The bell did not stop moving. It flew past where Koloff had been standing. It flew into the crowd at the front row. It hit a spectator who had volunteered to sit in the front row for the best view. The fan was injured so badly that they considered taking legal action against the promotion for the damage. That incident summed up the entire Hansen experience perfectly. Whether it was a lariat or a foreign object like a cowbell, the impact was always delivered at 100% velocity. Hansen could not see well enough to do it any other way. There was no half speed with Hansen. There was no pulling back at the last moment. There was only maximum force aimed in the general direction of where he thought you were standing. For Koloff, wrestling Hansen for an extended program meant living in constant dread. Every night, he had to trust that Hansen's muscle memory would be accurate enough to avoid breaking his neck. That is not a performance. That is survival. You are hoping and praying that a half-blind man swinging a cowbell or throwing a lariat will miss your vital organs by enough margin to avoid permanent damage. You are praying that his aim is off just enough that you only get bruised instead of hospitalized or killed. That is the fear Hansen created in Koloff's mind. It was environmental danger. It was the danger of the visual void. It was the danger of working with someone whose physical limitation made every move potentially lethal. If Hansen was accidental chaos caused by blindness, the next fear was pure velocity without any brakes. Road Warrior Hawk was part of the most famous tag team in wrestling history. The Road Warriors revolutionized the entire business. They were huge, fast, and terrifying to watch. They wore face paint and shoulder pads covered in metal spikes. They talked about ripping out the medulla oblongata of their opponents. They squashed enhancement talent in seconds to establish dominance. As they changed what it meant to be a dominant tag team in wrestling. Koloff's relationship with the Road Warriors was deeply complicated. Road Warrior Animal was his mate. Animal was the one who recruited him into the business in March 1984. They were peers in the locker room. They respected each other. They worked together. But Hawk was different. Hawk was legendary for his intensity that never decreased. He had one speed. Animal himself said in interviews that Hawk operated at 150 miles per hour. That pace never changed regardless of circumstances. It did not matter if Hawk was tired from wrestling the night before. It did not matter if his opponent was injured and needed to work carefully. It did not matter if the match called for a slower, more methodical pace. He came at you full speed every single time without exception. This was not an exaggeration or promotional talk. Hawk maintained that velocity regardless of his physical or mental state. For an opponent, this meant there was no way to slow down a match to protect yourself. There was no way to communicate that you needed him to ease up. There was no way to protect yourself if Hawk became overly aggressive during a sequence. You just had to brace for impact and hope you survived without serious injury. Koloff feared the Road Warriors because of their supernatural strength and their reputation for being absolutely reckless. This was not limited to enhancement talent or jobbers. Everyone in the locker room feared them. Main event stars feared them. Veterans with decades of experience feared them. Young guys just starting out feared them. It did not matter who you were. If you were booked in the ring with the Road Warriors, you were at serious risk of injury. Hawk in particular was known for delivering moves with legitimate force that hurt. He did not care about the safety of the person taking the move. He did not slow down to check positioning. He did not check on you after a big spot. He just kept going at full speed. Koloff recounted multiple serious injuries from his feuds with the Road Warriors over the years. He suffered separated shoulders that required medical attention. He suffered broken legs that put him out of action. He said in interviews that the Road Warriors don't do anything that's light and easy. That was not a compliment about their work. It was a warning to anyone who had to work with them. It was a statement of fact about how dangerous they were. While every match with them was a legitimate test of how much physical punishment Koloff could endure before his body gave out. Every slam came in hard with full force. Every move was stiff and delivered with intent. There was no give. There was no mercy. There was no consideration for safety. The Road Warriors had revolutionized power squashing in wrestling. They had changed the business model for dominant teams, but they had done it by being legitimately dangerous to work with on a nightly basis. The psychological toll was just as bad as the physical damage that accumulated. Hawk's locker room behavior was often antagonistic and confrontational. He would badmouth other wrestlers behind their backs. He would challenge them to prove themselves. He created tension everywhere he went. Utterly, the Road Warriors had signature threats they used to intimidate the crowd during promos. They would talk about ripping out the medulla oblongata of their opponents. For most fans watching at home, that was just tough talk. It was part of the gimmick. It was entertainment value. For Koloff, it reflected a real lack of physical restraint. Hawk truly did not have a brake pedal. He could not slow down even if he wanted to. He would not slow down because he saw it as weakness. That threat about ripping out the medulla oblongata was not just a promo line for television. It was a warning about how Hawk approached wrestling. He came at you with everything he had. He did not hold back for safety. He did not care if you got hurt in the process. Koloff partnered with the Road Warriors as part of the Superpowers alongside Dusty Rhodes, and that partnership was built on mutual respect for their abilities. It helped establish the superpower era of the NWA that became legendary, but the physical reality of sharing a ring with Hawk during those partnerships was absolutely terrifying. Every move was a gamble. Every slam could be the one that broke something permanently and ended a career. This was kinetic danger. This was momentum danger. Hawk delivered high-velocity impacts without a brake or deceleration mechanism. You could not slow him down through communication. You could not reason with him to work more carefully. You just had to survive and hope your body held together. And for Koloff, whose defensive mechanics were already underdeveloped due to his extremely limited training before debut, that survival was never guaranteed on any given night. The Road Warriors had what Koloff described as supernatural strength. That is how he phrased it in interviews. And when that strength was combined with Hawk's relentless pace that never stopped, it created a perfect storm of danger that left Koloff injured repeatedly throughout their feuds and partnerships. Koloff survived Hansen's blindness through luck and quick reflexes. He survived Hawk's velocity through toughness and pain tolerance. But the third fear was different in nature. This fear was calculated. This fear was deliberate. This fear was about veteran malice. Dick Murdoch was an old-school veteran from Texas. He was a second-generation wrestler who grew up in the business. He was known as a man's man with old-school values. He was a hardliner who believed in the tough traditions of territory wrestling. He was a shooter. And that term meant he knew how to hurt people for real if he chose to. And in 1987, he proved it in the most brutal way possible. During a program involving the NWA United States Tag Team Championship, Murdoch performed a brainbuster suplex on Koloff on the concrete floor outside the ring. A brainbuster is a move where the victim is lifted vertically upside down. Then they are dropped straight down onto their head or neck. The person taking the move is held completely vertical before being dropped with gravity. It is dangerous even when performed on a padded ring mat with give. On concrete, there is zero margin for error. None whatsoever. The concrete does not give. It does not absorb impact. It does not provide any cushion. It is completely unforgiving. The impact was catastrophic to Koloff's neck and spine. The promotion tried to make it look like there were serious consequences for what Murdoch had done, but the real damage was not to the storyline. The real damage was to Koloff's body. Murdoch's reputation as a hardliner meant he brought a level of shoot intensity to his matches that was frightening. He knew how to work stiff. He knew exactly how to hurt people when he wanted to, and he was willing to use that knowledge without hesitation. For Koloff, Murdoch was feared because he had the technical ability to inflict pain and the willingness to do so in a way that bypassed all the traditional safety protocols of the ring. This was not an accident like Hansen swinging blind. This was not a case of someone being too fast to control like Hawk. This was deliberate. This was calculated. Murdoch chose to execute that brainbuster on concrete. He chose to lift Koloff vertically. He chose to drop him directly on his head and neck. He chose to inflict that injury for reasons of hierarchy and respect. The concrete floor incident serves as a perfect example of the stiff culture that dominated 1980s wrestling. Veterans would often test younger stars to see if they were tough enough. They would use legitimate violence to maintain the toughness reputation of the territory. If a wrestler like Koloff rose too fast or became too popular without paying his dues properly, someone like Murdoch would hurt him. It was a way of enforcing the locker room hierarchy that had existed for decades. It was a reminder that the veterans still controlled the business, regardless of popularity. Koloff had not spent years in developmental territories learning his craft. He had not earned the respect of the veterans through years of hard work on the independent circuit paying his dues. He was a football player who got lucky with a connection. He was recruited by Road Warrior Animal based on size and look. He was pushed to the top of the card immediately. He won matches in 13 seconds to hide his inexperience. He became a main event star within months of starting, and Murdoch made absolutely sure he paid for that luck with a broken neck on concrete. The fear Koloff felt toward Murdoch was completely justified by reality. finality. Murdoch could have ended his career right there on that concrete floor outside the ring. The fact that Koloff survived and kept wrestling afterwards is a testament to his incredible toughness and pain tolerance. But the damage was done to his body. His neck was never the same after that injury. The structural problems from the brainbuster created weakness that made him more vulnerable to future injuries. It set him up for the final blow that would come 5 years later. This was technical danger. This was malicious danger. Murdoch used high-risk maneuvers on unforgiving surfaces intentionally. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew the consequences, and he did it anyway to teach a lesson. For Koloff, this fear was fundamentally different from Hansen or Hawk. Hansen was dangerous because he could not see properly. Hawk was dangerous because he could not slow down. Murdoch was dangerous because he chose to be. He had the skill, he had the knowledge, he had the experience, and he used all of it to inflict legitimate pain on a wrestler who had risen too fast in his opinion. The 1987 brainbuster on concrete was the definitive moment of fear regarding Murdoch. It highlighted the dangers of old-school shooters who felt disrespected by the new generation. It showed that in the territory days, veterans could and would hurt you to prove a point about respect. And for Koloff, it left scars both physical and psychological that never fully healed. Murdoch hurt him badly with long-term consequences, but the fourth fear ended him completely. Big Van Vader was a 450-pound powerhouse who defied physics. He combined the strong style of Japanese wrestling with a level of agility and striking speed that caught everyone completely off guard. Ken Shamrock, a legitimate mixed martial arts fighter, he once said in an interview that Vader's strikes were so fast it was impossible to pull your own strikes or defend properly against them. That is a terrifying statement coming from someone who fought professionally. Vader was not just big and heavy, he was fast beyond what his size should allow. He was reckless with the bodies of opponents, and he did not care about the skeletal integrity of the people he worked with. He was described by multiple wrestlers as a monster who brought a level of legitimate violence to the ring that few could withstand. This was not about putting on a show for the crowd. This was about hurting people, and Vader was very good at it. For Koloff, Vader represented the ultimate physical threat to his career and life. In 1992, Vader's reputation for being absolutely reckless was well known throughout the entire WCW locker room. Everyone feared working with him. Stories circulated constantly about his stiff strikes that left bruises. Stories circulated about his careless power moves that injured people. Stories circulated about wrestlers who had been seriously injured working programs with him. But Koloff had no choice in the matter. He was booked by the office to work a program with Vader. The bookers wanted the match for television. The storyline demanded it for ratings. So Koloff had to step into the ring with a 450-pound man who was known throughout the industry for hurting people. The fear became horrible reality on October 25th, 1992 at Halloween Havoc. The match was particularly stiff even by Vader's standards. Vader was working at his usual reckless pace without regard for safety. He was throwing strikes with full force. He was executing power moves without any regard for the safety of his opponent. Koloff's body was already seriously weakened by years of accumulated damage. Years of stiff impacts from Hansen had taken their toll on his neck. The separated shoulders and broken legs from working with Hawk had accumulated damage. The structural problems from Murdoch's brainbuster on concrete had never fully healed properly. His defensive mechanics were still underdeveloped because he had never received traditional training before his debut. He did not know how to protect himself properly during high-impact moves, and Vader exploited that weakness ruthlessly. During the Halloween Havoc match, Koloff suffered a herniated disc in his neck. The pain was excruciating and immediate. The injury was severe and career-threatening. This was not something that could be worked through with pain medication. This was not something that would heal with rest and physical therapy. This was career-ending damage to his spine. The injury was the final blow to a body that had taken years of punishment. Koloff's body could not take any more punishment from stiff workers. The cumulative trauma of years in the ring had finally broken him completely. He wrestled his final match on November 8th, 1992. It was a loss to Vader. Then he was forced into permanent retirement at age 31. Most wrestlers hit their prime in their 30s and work into their 40s. Koloff was forced out before he ever reached his peak earning years. Vader was feared not just for his massive size, but for his perceived lack of regard for his opponents. He brought massive impact combined with reckless striking speed. For Koloff, Vader was the opponent who took the theoretical fear of the stiff worker and turned it into the literal end of his professional life. The herniated disc was not just another injury on a long list. It was the culmination of years of cumulative trauma. Every stiff lariat from Hansen had weakened his neck structure. Every high-velocity slam from Hawk had damaged his shoulders, legs, and spine. Every impact from Murdoch had created structural problems. They all added up over the years, and Vader delivered the final blow that ended everything. This was the force of finality. This was massive mass danger combined with reckless speed. Now, Vader ended Koloff's career and forced him into a life of evangelism that he had never planned for or expected. Even after monsters like Vader ended his career, there was one more kind of danger worth mentioning. Abdullah the Butcher was pure, unpredictable chaos in human form. His entire career was built on the concept of madness and legitimate physical carnage. Abdullah was a monster. Full stop. He was known throughout the industry for his hardcore style. He used foreign objects like forks and chairs without warning. His matches were not carefully choreographed like normal wrestling. They were unchoreographed brawls that prioritized blood and chaos over technical wrestling ability. For a wrestler like Koloff, whose character was built on stoic power and athletic ability, Abdullah represented a threat to both his health and the art of the match itself. This was not wrestling in the traditional sense. This was violence purely for the sake of violence and shocking the crowd. Koloff's fear of Abdullah was shared by much of the wrestling industry. Abdullah was notorious for taking advantage of enhancement talent who could not fight back. He was bloodthirsty in the ring in ways that went beyond the storyline. He would use foreign objects without warning during matches. He would escalate matches beyond what was planned in the back. Unlike a traditional wrestler who followed a script and worked with their opponent to tell a story, Abdullah was a wild card. He might decide to legitimately injure an opponent to maintain his persona as a madman from the Sudan. That unpredictability was absolutely terrifying. Once you could not prepare for it properly. You could not plan around it. You could not trust that Abdullah would follow the agreed-upon finish or respect the psychology of the match. Every match with Abdullah was a roll of the dice. He might follow the script that day, or he might decide to fork your forehead for real and leave permanent scars. He might hit you with a chair harder than necessary. He might take the match in a violent direction that left you bleeding and injured. The unpredictable and often unhygienic violence of Abdullah made him a unique threat. Other wrestlers were dangerous because they were stiff like Murdoch. Other wrestlers were dangerous because they were blind like Hansen. Other wrestlers were dangerous because they were reckless like Vader. But Abdullah was dangerous because he was insane, or he played insane so convincingly that you could never be sure what was real and what was performance. This blurred line made him more dangerous than any of the others in certain ways. With Hansen, you knew he could not see and would swing hard. With Hawk, you knew he had one speed. With Murdoch, you knew he was testing you. With Vader, you knew he was reckless. But with Abdullah, you knew absolutely nothing about what would happen. He was chaos incarnate. The locker room shared this fear of Abdullah. Wrestlers would talk about him as someone who might legitimately injure you just to keep his persona intact. He was described as a wild card in the most literal sense possible. You never knew what you were going to get on any given night. With his use of unscripted foreign objects and hardcore chaos created behavioral danger that was impossible to defend against. This was not about size or strength. This was about unpredictability. But while these five men represented physical fear, there was another kind of fear worth mentioning. Ric Flair created a different type of fear entirely. Flair was the NWA World Champion and the undisputed master of the 60-minute Broadway. Wrestling Flair was not a risk to Koloff's life in the same way a match with Stan Hansen was, but it was an exhausting test of his athletic legitimacy. Flair's pressure pace and his ability to make his opponents look good meant that Koloff had to operate at his absolute peak for extended periods. The fear associated with Flair was the fear of being exposed as an unpolished performer in front of the world. Flair was the gold standard of the industry. A match with him could either solidify a career or destroy it completely. Koloff considers his match with Flair at the Great American Bash in 1985 to be the favorite match of his entire career. It was high drama. It was high stakes. The crowd was electric, but he has also spoken about the intense pressure of those encounters with Flair. Flair did not work stiff like the others, but the psychological pressure was immense and crushing. If Koloff could not keep up with Flair's legendary pace, the audience would see him as a fraud. The Russian nightmare persona would collapse. That professional anxiety was different from the physical terror of a Dick Murdoch brainbuster, but it was still a significant component of the fear Koloff felt throughout his career. In contrast to the reckless danger, Koloff's feud with Magnum TA stands out. The Best of 7 series in 1986 for the NWA United States Heavyweight Championship was a masterclass in professional wrestling. The matches were brutal and intense. They often involved run-ins and false finishes, but they were built on a foundation of mutual respect and professional coordination. This was wrestling done right. The tragedy of Magnum TA's career-ending car accident in October 1986 served as a pivotal moment for Koloff. It led to his babyface turn as he joined Dusty Rhodes to form the Superpowers out of respect for his fallen rival. This event underscored the inherent risks of the wrestling life, where a career could be ended not just by a stiff opponent like Vader, but by a random accident outside the ring. Where the physical toll of wrestling these dangerous men eventually led Koloff to a profound life change. After his forced retirement in 1992, necessitated by the herniated disc neck injury from Vader, he turned toward faith. On October 17, 1993, he surrendered his life to Jesus. He described it as heart surgery performed by God himself. This transition from the Russian nightmare to what he now calls a devil's nightmare was a direct result of the violence and fear he experienced in the ring. His current work through Men by Design and his Man Up podcast focuses on helping young men find purpose and navigate the challenges of the modern world. His reflections on his feared opponents are now framed through a lens of redemption and spiritual growth. The 5 wrestlers Nikita Koloff feared were more than just opponents on a card. When they were the physical embodiment of the risks inherent in a business that demanded total commitment to a tough persona. Stan Hansen's literal blindness meant every strike came in at maximum force. Road Warrior Hawk's reckless speed meant there was no way to slow down a match. Dick Murdoch's veteran malice meant he could hurt you on purpose. Big Van Vader's massive impact meant your body could only take so much. Abdullah the Butcher's unpredictable madness meant anything could happen. For Nelson Simpson, the fear was a survival mechanism that eventually led him away from the ring toward redemption. These 5 men shaped the Russian nightmare as much as any scripted victory. His monster image was built in a world where danger was real, and these 5 men proved it every single night.